I have seen a man stop breathing in a crowd of 1,000 people who never noticed. That is the thing they don't teach you about a public square, that a body can fail in plain sight, surrounded, photographed, leaned against, and not one of the 1,000 will turn. So when I tell you that the only person in that whole forecourt who saw the boy begin to die was a man forbidden to move, you may not believe me. I would not have believed it either before that afternoon. I have been a nurse for 19 years. I had never watched a statue save a life. It was the warm part of a spring day, the kind that pulls every family in the county out toward the palace railings. I was off shift, walking the long ironwork fence of the fictional house of Wenlow with a paper cup of coffee I had no intention of finishing, when I felt that small wrong note you learn to feel in this work, a sound out of place. A child coughing, not a sick cough. A wet, thin, closing cough, the kind that comes from a throat narrowing faster than a throat should. I turned, and so did no one else. The boy was perhaps 7, pressed to the black-and gilt railing between his mother and a knot of tourists, one fist clutched around a half-eaten pastry, the other rising slowly toward his own collar. His lips had gone the wrong color. His mother was looking the other way, talking, laughing, her hand resting on his shoulder, without feeling that the shoulder underneath it had begun to shake. People filmed the guard behind the bars. Nobody filmed the boy. And the guard was already looking at him. That is what stopped me where I stood. The sentry on the plinth behind the railing, red wool tunic, tall black bearskin, white gloves on the rifle, chin strap cutting a hard line across a jaw that did not move, was a figure built entirely out of not looking. His whole trade was the 1,000-yard stare, the eyes that take in everything and acknowledge nothing. I had walked past 100 of them in my life and never once felt seen, but his eyes were not on the middle distance. They had come down, a fraction, by a degree no tourist would catch, and they had fixed on the small fist climbing toward that collar, and they did not leave it. I started moving before I had finished the thought. 19 years teaches your feet to go before your brain has the words, but I was 40 feet off, with a press of bodies between us, and the boy was on the wrong side of an iron fence built to keep people exactly where they were. The guard moved his eyes again, not his head, his eyes. He flicked them hard twice, toward the gatehouse at the corner of the forecourt where a sergeant stood half in shadow. It was such a small thing. It was the only thing he could do. And the sergeant, God bless the discipline of men who read each other without words, straightened off the wall as if he'd been struck. He sees it, I said out loud to no one, to the coffee cup, to the spring air. He sees it and he can't reach it. I got my elbow into the crowd and I pushed. The boy's knees were going soft now. I could see it the way you see a wave start to curl before it breaks, that loosening in the legs, the body deciding to sit down whether the floor was ready or not. His mother felt the lean at last and looked down, and the laugh died on her face and became a sound I have heard too many times, that first high note of a parent who does not yet understand but already, in the animal part of her, knows. She caught him under the arms. She said his name. She said it again, louder, the way you say a name when you are trying to argue with what your hands are telling you. "Make a hole," I called, in the voice I keep for exactly this. "Medical, make a hole, let me through." A square full of strangers does the thing a square full of strangers does. Some moved. Some turned to film. One man actually lifted his phone toward the boy, and I will carry the memory of that phone for the rest of my life. But I got through, dropped my coffee, and went down on my knees on the warm stone in front of a child whose throat was closing around the last of the air in it. His face was swelling. That was the thing. Not flushed, swelling. The soft pad under his eyes, the line of his lips, the lobes of his ears, all of it puffing in that terrible smooth way, hives blooming up his neck like something poured under the skin. I have a word for that face. The word is the one you do not say out loud in front of a mother. I put my fingers to the side of his throat, and the pulse was a hummingbird and his breath was a whistle through a straw, and I knew we had minutes. Not many. The kind of minutes you count. "What did he eat?" I said. "Look at me. What did he eat? Does he have allergies? Does he carry anything? He peanuts he can't have. The mother's hands were everywhere and nowhere. He has a pen. He has it. It's in the car. Oh God, the car's 3 streets. 3 streets. 3 streets is forever. 3 streets is a different country. Does anyone have an auto-injector? I said, standing, turning, throwing it out over the crowd the way you throw a rope you know probably won't reach. An EpiPen, adrenaline, anyone. A child, anyone carries one. Blank faces, phones. The vast, useless sympathy of people who do not know what to do and so do nothing. And behind the railing, behind the bars, the guard's eyes came off the boy for the first time and went to me. 1 second. He looked at me the way one professional looks at another across a disaster, the look that says I understand exactly what is happening and exactly how little time there is. Then his eyes snapped back to the corner, to the gatehouse, to the sergeant who was already moving, already, before I had finished shouting, already crossing the forecourt at a pace that was not quite a run because men in that uniform are not permitted to run, and yet it ate the ground. That guard could not leave his post. I knew that much about him. They are sworn to the spot of stone they stand on. They do not break for a fainting tourist or a fainting royal or a fainting anything. The whole point of him was that he would not move, and he had just spent the only currency he had, a flick of the eyes, twice, to send the one man in the square who could run. I went back down to the boy. His eyes were rolling up. His mother was holding his head and saying please into his hair. Stay with me, I told him. Stay with me, little man, help is coming. You keep that little bit of air moving, you hear me, in and out, you're doing it, you're doing it. He wasn't much. The whistle was thinning to nothing. And I had no adrenaline, no airway, no kit, 19 years of training and 2 empty hands and a clock running down inside a child's throat. I looked up once more at the man behind the bars, the man who could not come, and I swear to you his jaw was set against something. Not fear. I have seen fear. This was a man holding the line of himself by main force, every muscle of him wanting to vault that railing, and not letting himself, because the thing he could do from where he stood was worth more than the thing his body screamed to do. He had seen the swelling before any of us. He had read it across 40 feet through iron bars while 1,000 people looked at his hat. Now he was betting the boy's life that the line he'd thrown would land in time. The sergeant reached the railing on his side of the iron and did not waste a word on me. He spoke to the guard, low and fast, 2 soldiers exchanging the smallest possible amount of information at the highest possible speed. I caught only fragments: the boy, the throat, her son, and a single gloved hand from the sentry, lifted no higher than his own belt buckle, 2 fingers pointing down at the stone in front of the boy and then jerking once toward the gatehouse. Where? There. Now. A whole sentence in a movement smaller than a flinch. Then the sergeant turned and put a radio to his mouth, and I heard the only words I needed. Watchroom, gate, forecourt, child, suspected anaphylaxis. Bring the kit, bring it running. Anaphylaxis. He'd said it clean and correct, the right word, the word that tells a watchroom exactly what to grab and exactly how fast. Most laypeople would have said the boy was choking, or fainting, or sick, and the watchroom would have brought a chair and a glass of water. The sentry had given the sergeant the right word with a flick and a point, and the sergeant had passed it on whole. Somewhere inside those palace walls, a cabinet was being thrown open. But the walls were a long way off, and the boy was here. He stopped, the mother said. Her voice had gone flat and strange, the calm that is worse than screaming. He stopped. He's not. Why isn't he? I had my hand on his chest, and there was the faintest movement still, a flutter, the body refusing to quit even as the door to the lungs swung shut. Not stopped. Almost. I tipped his head, lifted his chin, opened the airway as wide as I could make it, and put my cheek to his mouth and felt a thread of breath, hot and thin, a thread you could have snapped between 2 fingers. He's breathing, I said. It's small, but it's there. We hold this open and we wait for the kit. Look at me. What's his name? Tomas. She could barely get it out. Tomas, he's 7, he's... Tomas. I set it down into his swelling face like it was a rope of its own. Tomas, you stay. Your mum's right here. Help's coming through that gate any second, and it's the fastest help in this whole city. You understand me? You just keep that little thread going. I want you to understand how alone you can be in the middle of a crowd. I had perhaps 200 people within 30 feet of me. I had phones, gasps, a man somewhere saying, "Is he all right? Is the kid all right?" over and over without coming closer. A woman crying who did not even know the family. And I had nothing in my hands. The one human being in that entire square who had done something useful was a man pinned to a square of stone by an oath, who had not been able to take a single step toward the child he saved by seeing. Because make no mistake, he was saving him, right then with his stillness. I learned later how it works, and it changed how I see those men forever. The watch room runs a duty board. Every sentry on the forecourt is a node, a fixed point with eyes, and the whole architecture of the place assumes that a man who never moves will see what moving men miss. A patrolling officer scans and passes on. A sentry holds one frame of the world and holds it for hours, and so he is the one who notices when the frame changes by a single degree. The boy had been in his frame. The mother's laugh, the half-eaten pastry, the fist rising to the collar, all of it in the one slice of the forecourt that one unmoving man had been watching since the changing of the watch. He had been built, trained, and posted precisely to catch the thing nobody else would. And then a door under the colonnade banged open, and a woman came out of it at a dead sprint, with a green bag bouncing against her hip. "Make way," the sergeant roared, and this time the crowd made way, because there is a tone of voice that strangers obey, and he had found it. She came through the gate. They'd swung the small pedestrian gate in the railing, the one I'd never once seen open, and she was on her knees beside me before the gate had stopped moving, and she was good. I could see in 3 seconds she was good, the way she had the bag open and her hands already reaching. "Talk to me," she said. 7-year-old, known peanut allergy, ate something with nuts, full anaphylaxis, airway closing, faint air movement only, no injector on scene, down maybe 4 minutes, I said, in the flat fast shorthand of 2 professionals who have just become one team. "His name's Tomas. Mum's here." "Got it." She pulled the auto-injector from the bag. The palace kept them, of course they kept them. A place that hosts 1,000 strangers a day stocks for the day a stranger's child stops breathing, and she uncapped it and looked at the mother. "I'm giving him adrenaline. It's what he needs." "Yes. Yes, please." The injector went into the meat of the boy's outer thigh, firm and sure, a click and a hold and a count. And I put my hand back on his chest and waited for the thing I have waited for at a dozen bedsides and never stopped praying for. Behind me I was dimly aware the sentry had not moved. The crisis had walked past him through the gate he was sworn to guard, and he had let it through with his eyes forward because his part was done, and a soldier does not abandon a finished job to admire it. He had thrown the rope. Other hands were hauling now. He held his line. For 3 seconds, nothing. Then Tomas dragged in a breath that you could hear. A real one, ragged and whooping, and the most beautiful sound I have heard in 19 years of beautiful and terrible sounds. The mother made a noise that wasn't a word. She bent over him with her forehead nearly to his and her shoulders shaking, and the responder said, calm and bright, "There he is. There he is. Good lad," and reached for her radio to call the second stage of help. Because adrenaline buys you time, it does not buy you the day, and a child who has had a reaction like that needs a hospital and watching and more than one pair of hands. I sat back on my heels for 1 second, just one. You learn to take the 1 second when the thread holds, because there is always more work coming and you have to spend the second before it arrives. And in that 1 second I looked up, past the responder, past the mother, past the small pedestrian gate standing open in the railing, to the man on the plinth. He was looking forward. Eyes on the middle distance, jaw level, gloves on the rifle, the perfect blank statue I had walked past my whole life. You would never have known. A tourist arriving in that exact moment would have seen a motionless ornamental soldier and a small commotion on the cobbles and connected the two not at all. He had given no sign. He took no credit. The thing he had done lived only in the eyes of the people who happened to be watching his eyes, and almost nobody watches a guard's eyes. We watch the hat, the wool, the spectacle of a man pretending to be furniture. I watched his eyes, and I saw them come down once, just once, the same fraction of a degree, and land on Tomas, on the small chest now rising and falling, fighting but rising, and I saw something move at the corner of that hard mouth. Not a smile. Nothing so loose as a smile. Something tighter and deeper, the small private easing of a man who has been holding a great strain and is allowed for one breath to set it down. Then his eyes went back up to the middle distance, and the strain went back on, and he was furniture again. I have thought about that half-second more than I have thought about almost anything in my career. "You the one who called it?" the responder asked me, working as she talked, getting a line of obs, watching the boy's color climb back toward human. "No," I said. "I'm a nurse. I was just walking. I got here a minute in." I nodded at the plinth, at the bars, at the man behind them. "He called it. The sentry. He saw the swelling before any of us did. He couldn't shout and he couldn't move, so he flicked his eyes at the sergeant and the sergeant ran. That's what got your kit here in 4 minutes instead of 14. She glanced up at the guard for half a second, and something passed over her face, the recognition of one person who works the line for another. "Huh," she said softly. Then, because the work does not stop for wonder, "Tomas, Tomas, can you squeeze my hand for me? Big strong squeeze. There it is. Good." The boy's eyes were open now. Glassy, frightened, swollen still, but open and tracking, finding his mother's face and locking on it the way a small child's eyes lock on the one fixed thing in a spinning world. He couldn't talk yet. The throat was still half shut, the adrenaline still wrestling the swelling down inch by inch, but he was in there. He was looking out. The lights had come back on behind the glass. Across the forecourt, I heard the two-tone of an ambulance turning in. And the crowd's energy changed the way crowd energy does when the professionals arrive in numbers, and the danger turns out, against all the odds, to be survivable. People exhaled. The man with the phone finally lowered it. Somewhere a woman was crying with relief over a child who wasn't even hers, and I have never minded that kind of crying. The medics came across the stone with a chair and a bag and the unhurried speed of people who have decided the worst is behind them. The responder gave them the handover, peanut anaphylaxis, 1 dose of adrenaline at roughly the 4-minute mark. Good response, airway improving, GCS climbing, and I filled the gaps, and the mother answered the questions she could and gripped her son's hand through every one of them. Tomas was loaded gently into the chair. He was breathing in long, shaky pulls now, each one a little wider than the last, the hives already starting their slow retreat down his neck. And as they wheeled him toward the ambulance, the chair turned, and for a moment the boy was facing the railing. He was 7 years old, and he had just nearly died, and his face was still a swollen, frightened thing. And yet, I watched it happen. His eyes found the guard. Children find the guard. It's the hat, the stillness, the toy soldier wonder of him. Every child in that square had looked at him before looking at anything else, and Tomas, even half-conscious, even shaking, looked at him now. And whether the boy understood what the man had done for him, whether some part of a 7-year-old mind had registered, in the swimming chaos of those minutes, that the soldier behind the bars had been the one watching him the whole time, I cannot say. But the boy lifted one small swollen hand off the arm of the chair, and he waved. It was the smallest wave in the world, barely a wave at all. A few fingers opening and closing, the way a tired child waves good night. And the man who does not move, the man sworn to a square of stone, the man who had held the line of himself by main force while a child stopped breathing 40 feet away, he broke it. Not much. You have to understand the scale these men live on. Their grand gestures are measured in millimeters. He brought his white-gloved right hand up off the rifle, slowly, deliberately, and he gave the boy a salute. A real one. Crisp, full, the salute you give an officer, the salute you give the flag, the salute you give the thing you have decided is worth honoring. He gave it to a swollen, frightened, half-conscious 7-year-old in a wheelchair, and he held it until the chair had turned away. The crowd that had ignored him all day saw it now. The phones came up too late, the way phones always are, catching the aftermath instead of the act, but a few of them caught the salute, and that is the clip that went around, the guard saluting the rescued boy, and not one of those clips understood that the salute was the smallest part of what that man had done. The salute was the receipt. The work had been the 4 silent minutes before it, the eyes that came down a fraction of a degree and would not leave, the 2 flicks toward the gatehouse, the strain held against every instinct to vault the iron. The mother saw it. She had been about to follow the chair to the ambulance, and she stopped, and she looked at the guard, and she put her hand over her mouth, and I watched her understand. I do not know how much she pieced together in that moment and how much came later, but something landed. She took 3 steps toward the railing, toward the man behind the bars, and she said, in a voice that broke on the second word, "Thank you, thank you. I didn't even see." He did not answer her. He could not. He had already brought the hand back down to the rifle. The salute was spent and the post had reclaimed him, and the rules that govern those men do not allow conversation with the public, not even this. His eyes were forward again. But I was close enough and watching closely enough to see that the eyes were wet, and that he was holding them wide and unblinking against it the way you do when you will not let it fall while you are on duty. The mother understood that too. She lowered her hand. She gave him a small nod, the nod you give a man who cannot nod back, and she turned and ran after her son. I stayed. Somebody had to give a fuller account to the medics and the responder, and besides, I was not ready to walk away from the strangest and finest thing I had seen in my working life. So I gave my details, and I helped pack the green bag, and I watched the ambulance pull out with its lights turning and its sirens silent, a good sign, sirens off, a child stable enough not to need the noise. And then it was just the forecourt again. The crowd thinned and reformed and forgot, the way crowds do. New tourists arrived who had missed all of it and lifted their phones to the motionless soldier and saw only the hat and the wool and the spectacle. The small pedestrian gate was closed and locked again. Within 20 minutes you could not have told that anything had happened on that stone at all. Except the man knew, and now I knew. I went to the gatehouse before I left, because I wanted to say something to the sergeant who had run. I found him doing the unglamorous afterwork of a near disaster, a note in a log, a word into a radio, the paperwork that follows any incident on royal ground. He was older than I'd thought from across the square, gray at the temples, with the careful economy of movement men get after 30 years of standing. "I'm a nurse," I told him. "I was on the scene. I wanted you to know the speed of that kit, 4 minutes. That's the whole reason that boy's alive. Most days he doesn't get 4 minutes, he gets 14, and 14 is a funeral. I am blunt. The work makes you blunt. Whatever you've got that lets your man on the plinth flag a medical emergency without leaving his post, that's a good system, and it worked today." The sergeant looked at me for a moment, and then he did something I didn't expect. He almost smiled. "It's not the system, ma'am," he said. "We've got the system, sure, eyes on protocol. A sentry sees something, he can signal the gate, but the system tells you what to do when you've already seen it." He nodded out toward the plinth, toward the red and black figure standing dead still in the afternoon light. "The system doesn't make you see a swollen lip on a 7-year-old across 40 feet of crowd when 1,000 people are waving at you. That part's not in any manual. That part's just him." "Has he done this before?" The sergeant's almost smile went somewhere quieter. "He was a medic," he said. "Before all this, before the wool and the bearskin, years of it, the hard kind, the kind you don't talk about after. He came to us when he was done with all that and he asked for a quiet post. Said he wanted to stand still for a while where nothing happened. He shook his head slowly. Funny thing. You can take the man off the line, the eyes don't retire, he still sees it. He'll always see it. He saw that boy going before the boy's own mother did, because once you've watched enough people stop breathing, you can't unlearn the shape of it coming. I stood there with that for a moment, in the warm spring light, in front of the locked gate. The swelling only he saw, because he was the only one in that square who had ever been trained to look for it, and the only one whose whole job that day was to look, and the only one who could not look away. I want to tell you the rest, because a story like this deserves its ending, and because for 2 weeks I did not have it, and not having it sat in my chest like a stone. That is the cruelty of the work for a passerby. You go down on your knees in the street, you give everything you have for 4 minutes, and then they wheel the patient away into an ambulance and out of your life, and you almost never learn whether you helped or only watched someone die slower. I had the boy's first name and a swollen face and a small goodnight wave, and that was all. I went home that night and I made tea I didn't drink, and I sat at my own railing, the little iron balcony of my flat, and I thought about a man who could not move, and a boy who could not breathe, and the 40 feet of crowd between them that one pair of trained eyes had crossed without a single step. I went back to the palace railings the following Saturday. I told myself I wanted the walk. That was a lie. I wanted to see the plinth. But the sentry on it was a different man, younger, and I felt foolish standing there searching a stranger's face for a story he had no part in, so I left. It was 11 days later that the letter came to my ward. Hospitals are leaky places. Somebody on the scene had given somebody my name, and the mother had asked and asked until she found where I worked. The letter was written in a careful, exhausted hand, the hand of a woman who had spent a fortnight too frightened to sleep and was only now coming down from it. She wrote that Tomas was well, fully well, home, back at school, banned for life from anything that had ever met a peanut, carrying 2 auto-injectors now in a little bag he was not allowed to take off, furious about the bag in the way. Only a recovered 7-year-old can be furious about the thing that saved him. She wrote that the hospital had told her plainly, another few minutes and the outcome would have been different. That the adrenaline had reached him inside the window barely, and the window had been held open by the speed of the kit, and the speed of the kit had been bought by a soldier who saw her son begin to die while she was looking the other way. She wrote, I have replayed that afternoon 1,000 times. I keep arriving at the same place. I was touching him. My hand was on his shoulder, and I did not feel it. A man behind a fence who never touched him, who was not allowed to come near him, who could not say one word, he was the one who saw. I do not understand how to live with that, and I do not have to, because my son is alive, and the not understanding is a small price. But I wanted you to know that I think about him every single day. I do not even know his name. Neither did I. I still don't. That is part of it, I think part of what those men are. He had no name to me. He was a post and a pair of eyes and 4 held minutes and a salute given to a child in a wheelchair. He did not want a name. The sergeant had told me as much without saying it. A man who comes to that uniform after years of the hard work, who asks for a quiet post where nothing happens, is not a man who wants his name in a clip. He wanted to stand still. He wanted, I think, to put down the seeing for a while, and discovered, the way the sergeant said, that the eyes don't retire. There was a photograph folded inside the letter. The mother had sent it without comment, and it needed none. It was Tomas, taken that weak color back in his face, the swelling long gone, a gap where a baby tooth had been the last time I saw him and hadn't noticed. He was grinning at whoever held the camera, and pinned to his shirt was a small drawing he had made. A tall figure in a black hat behind a row of bars, and a stick figure boy waving, and between them in the wobbling capitals of a 7-year-old, the words the man who saw me. He had understood. Somewhere in the swimming dark of those 4 minutes, some part of that child had registered the soldier watching him, and it had stayed, and it had come out in crayon. I have kept that photograph. It is on the inside of my locker door at the ward, where I see it before every shift. A month after that, I did a thing I am a little embarrassed to admit. I went back to the Railings on a weekday morning when the crowds were thin, and I asked at the gatehouse for the sergeant, and I asked him whether I might say one word to his man on the plinth. I knew the rules. I knew the man could not answer me, but I told the sergeant I would not ask him to. The sergeant considered me for a while. Then he walked out with me to the edge of the forecourt to the line where the public stops, and he stood beside me, and he said nothing, and he let me look. The guard was there. The same man. I knew the set of those shoulders now the way you know a face. He stood in the cool morning light, red wool and black bearskin and white gloves on the rifle, perfectly still, eyes on the middle distance, furniture again to every soul who walked past. I did not call out to him. I did not wave. I would not have insulted his discipline with it. I simply stood at the line where the public stops, and I looked at him, and I let my own face say the only thing I had come to say, which was thank you, and I am one of the people who knows. And his eyes came down, a fraction of a degree, the smallest movement a man can make and still call it a movement. They found me at the line, and they held for perhaps a second and a half, long enough and no longer. He did not nod. He did not smile. He did not break the post by so much as a breath. But he had seen me see him, and he let me know he had, and then his eyes went back up to the middle distance, and the strain went back on, and he was a statue once more. That was all. That was everything. I turned and walked back toward the gate, and the sergeant walked with me, and neither of us said a word until we reached the shadow of the colonnade. "He'll never tell you it was anything," the sergeant said then quietly. "If you ever did get him to talk, which you won't, he'd say he did his job. He saw something in his frame, he flagged it, the system worked. He'd give the whole afternoon to the kit and the responder and you. He believes that. That's the kind of man he is." He paused. "But I've stood that gate 30 years, ma'am. I've watched 1,000 sentries hold 1,000 frames. And I'm telling you, most of them would not have seen that boy. The frame is the same for all of them. The seeing isn't." I wrote the mother back. I told her what the sergeant had told me, that the man had been a medic, that he carried the old training in him like a second spine, that the seeing was not a miracle but a discipline, the longest and quietest kind of discipline, the kind that keeps watching a frame of the world for hours on the chance that the frame will change by one terrible degree. I told her she had nothing to live down. That no parent on earth feels their own hand on a shoulder turn cold. That is exactly the catastrophe the man on the plinth exists to catch, and on that day he caught it. I told her the not feeling was human, and the seeing was rare, and that the rare thing had been standing in the right place at the right hour, which is the only kind of luck that has ever mattered. I did not tell her the part I have kept for myself until now, because I did not have the words for it then, and I am only finding them as I write. I have spent my life around the loud machinery of rescue. The sirens, the crash carts, the shouted handovers, the doors banging open and the green bags bouncing on hips. That is what saving a life looks like in my world. It is fast and it is loud and it takes 10 trained hands. And I had always, without quite knowing it, believed that the saving was in the machinery, in the adrenaline and the airway and the speed. But the machinery does nothing if it does not arrive. And the machinery only arrives if someone somewhere sees the thing in time and sounds the alarm. The whole roaring apparatus of rescue rests, in the end, on a single quiet act at the start. Somebody looked, and somebody understood what they were looking at, and somebody refused to look away. Everything else is hauling on a rope that the first person threw. And on that warm afternoon at the Railings, the first person, the one who looked and understood and would not look away, was the one human being in a square of 1,000 who had been forbidden to move toward the very child he was saving. He saved Tomas with his stillness. I have turned that sentence over and over, and it has stopped sounding like a paradox to me. His stillness was not the absence of action. His stillness was the action. He had been posted there, made furniture there, trained into a statue there, precisely so that when the world changed by a degree, he would be the one fixed point that noticed. The whole point of the man who does not move is that he is still watching when everyone who moves has already moved on. I think about the wave sometimes. The smallest wave in the world, a few swollen fingers opening and closing, a tired child's good night. And I think about the salute that answered it, the white glove coming up off the rifle, slow and full and held, a soldier honoring a 7-year-old as if he were a flag. People who saw the clip thought it was sweet. A guard saluting a sick boy, how lovely. They did not know they were watching the only visible inch of a thing that had been entirely invisible. A man telling a child, in the one language his oath allowed him, I saw you. I saw you the whole time. You were never as alone as you looked. Because that is the truth the boy could not have known, sinking down against an iron railing with his throat closing, and his mother's hand resting unfeeling on his shoulder. He was surrounded and he was vanishing, and not one of the 1,000 turned. But he was not unseen. Across 40 feet of crowd, through black and gilt bars, from a square of stone he was sworn never to leave, a man was watching him with the whole of his attention, holding the line of himself against every instinct to run to him, spending the only thing he could spend, 2 flicks of the eyes, to send help that he himself was not permitted to be. I have been a nurse for 19 years. I have seen the loud machinery save 100 lives, but the finest thing I ever watched was quiet. It was a man who would not move, who saw the swelling no one else saw, and who proved to me, once, on a spring afternoon, in front of 1,000 people who never noticed, that the truest guardian is not always the one who reaches you. Sometimes he is only the one who never takes his eyes off you, and never lets you fall alone.